Welcome back to our Wednesday Bible study. We've been studying the book of Judges. Most of those are on text format on Facebook. But today we're doing a video because it's Wednesday and we want everybody to be able to share in that. So we've studied up through chapter 3. We've looked at the first couple of Judges, 3 of them in fact already, and seen some very interesting things about them. We've learned a lot about Judges. We want to remind everybody again in this lesson as we start chapter 4 that a judge in the book of Judges in the Bible is not the kind of judge that we think about, who is one who decides cases in court. However, the one we're going to look at today did kind of do more of that kind of thing than some of the others. Yes, Kazia?
What was the third one?
Shamgar. Remember, Shamgar, he only had one little verse about him. Remember, he killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, right? So it's kind of like a stick that you use to poke a cow to make it go where you want it to go. That's what an ox goad is.
Okay.
Yes, Hannah.
Why did he use it?
I guess because that's what he had, or that's the tool he was good at using. Some people use swords, some people use bow and arrow, some people use a slingshot, like David did. So lots of different things. Abigail?
Is that more impressive than when Samson used the donkey jaw?
I don't know if I'd say it's more impressive. It's definitely, they're both different tools, different weapons that usually you wouldn't think somebody would use.
A donkey jaw?
Yeah, the jawbone from a dead donkey. Yeah. Used it kind of like a club, I guess. But anyway, we'll talk about Samson too when we get to him in a few more chapters still. So as we come to chapter 4, this is a very special judge. You remember who's in chapter 4? Who is it, Abigail?
Deborah.
Deborah. It's the only woman in the book of Judges who is a leader among God's people. And chapter 4, verse 1 starts the same way that it does every time. After one of the judges dies, in this case, Ehud had died, it says, and the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord.
Well, wouldn't it be Shamgar died?
Well, Shamgar, we only have the one verse about Shamgar, so he may have just fought one battle or something during the time of Ehud. We're not sure exactly, but it says after Ehud died. So
okay.
Ehud is the one that lived the longest. Maybe Shamgar died before Ehud. We just don't know because there's so little said about Ehud, about Shamgar rather. So here we are, people of Israel, doing evil again. This time, verse 2 tells us that the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And so again, they're sold into the hands of one of the nations of the land of Canaan, in this case, Jabin. Now, Jabin had a commander of his army whose name was Sisera. And he lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Don't know where that is. Probably somebody's found a spot on the map that they think is that, but I don't know where it is. So then the people of Israel cry out to the Lord for help. It doesn't tell us, the other times it said it was for 8 years or 18 years that they had this kind of slavery type, being under the rule of another king. This time it doesn't say exactly how much it had been right there. Then it's going to say, though, the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, for he had 900 chariots of iron that he used, and he had oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. So this is their longest time yet. They'd gone 8 years once, and then they broke free for a little while. Then they went 18 years, then they broke free. This Sisera, who was the commander of Jabin's army, has been torturing them and oppressing the people of Israel with his 900 chariots. That was a lot of chariots back at that time. And so he's using these iron chariots to treat them cruelly for these 20 years. Now, during this time, it says that Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lepidoth, was judging Israel at that time. And she was actually seemingly doing what we would think of more as the kind of thing a judge would do. It says in verse 5, she used to sit under a palm of Deborah. So a tree. She sat under a tree. It was called the palm of Deborah, between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel would come up to her and ask for judgment. This is kind of similar. Moses set people up to make decisions when there was a disagreement, and that's what we use judges for today. This certainly wasn't like a criminal court or something like that. It's more of a small claims court, kind of like we might see Judge Wapner back in the day on TV, how he used to be, or now all the Judge Judy or different ones that they have now, where they and it's kind of they come and they argue their case, and then the judge makes the decision. They give up their right to a trial by jury and all that, which they didn't have that then anyway. But we see that kind of thing happening. But here she is. She sits under this tree, and people would come up to her, and they would argue their case before her, and she would give her judgment as to which was right. So she's obviously a very wise woman. She seemingly also, we'll see it also as a very godly woman. She is a prophetess, which means she is able to even speak on behalf of God, which is something that was kind of unusual in the Old and New Testaments for a woman to be in this role, to be speaking on behalf of God. And yet we see that this is the case in this time, that things are desperate. They're looking now, these men that ought to be strong come looking to a woman to lead them into battle even, we see. So we see her there under the tree giving judgment, and she summons Barak the son of Binoam from Kadesh Naphtali, which would have been one of the cities in Naphtali, which was one of the tribes. And she says to him, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you?" So now here's her showing her profiting ability. She tells him what God has commanded. "Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun." Now, we don't have the first record of this command that God had given for Barak to do this. But she reminds him, like a good prophet would, "Hey, don't you know what God has said? Don't you remember? God told you you're supposed to be doing this." And so she goes to do this. She tells him to get these 10,000 men gathered together. And she says, "I will draw," and this is still her speaking for God. This is what God was saying. "And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon, with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand." So she's trying to encourage the men to be brave and go fight and go take the land like God has commanded them to do. But notice how fearful the men are. Barak says to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I won't go." Isn't that sad? He's depending on this woman to go with him to the battle. That these men are somewhat cowardly. They won't go and fight the battle unless she comes with them. Now maybe they think of her as kind of like a good luck charm because she's a prophetess or because she's a leader, and he thinks that the men will follow better. We don't know all of his thinking, but it's just interesting that he says he won't go unless she comes with him. Well, she has something to say to that, and again, God gives him a message through her. She said, "I will go with you, surely. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory." So she said, because you were afraid to go by yourself, you're not going to get the credit for this. Instead, she says, "For the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Now we might be thinking here, oh, well, Deborah is going to wind up conquering and winning the battle and get the credit. But we're going to find out later that's not the case. It is going to be a woman, but it won't be Deborah. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali and Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went with him. And so they go off to the battle. And we're going to stop right there for today. But here we go. Deborah and Barak together, they're taking the army, and they're going 10,000 men to go fight against King Jabin's 900 chariots of iron that are led by Sisera. So any questions or thoughts about Deborah's a pretty amazing woman, and she is a great role model for a lot of people. Abigail?
That's Julia.
Julia? I'm looking the wrong way. Julia?
Were are iron chariots kind of like cars pulled by horses?
Well, they would have been made out of metal like cars, but they would have still looked just like the wooden chariot. So they would have not been four wheels like cars.
They
If you
have
ever,
2 wheels.
they would have had two wheels, yeah, and they would have ridden in them, and they would have been pulled by a horse. But they would have been made out of metal, so it would have been harder. Like if the people are shooting an arrow that has a flame on it, and it could stick into a wooden chariot and catch it on fire and cause trouble. But with an iron chariot, it'd just bounce off the side, or even if it stuck, it'd just burn out. It wouldn't catch it on fire because it's made out of iron. So any other questions or thoughts? Any thoughts about Deborah or Barak or?
So what if they made it slippery inside and
Well-
they found out it was wood because they painted it silver?
Well, they didn't just paint it silver. It was made out of iron. It was actually metal. So, yeah. If it was just painted silver, that would be a different story entirely. Abigail? I got the right name this time.
When it said that Sisera would be handed into the hands of a woman, I always thought that it actually meant Deborah.
Yeah.
It was actually
It's not going to be Deborah. But yeah, that's the idea there. It kind of leads you to think, oh, well, Deborah's going to get the credit for this. But she didn't want the credit. She just wanted the battle to be fought and God's will to be done. And it shows again what a humble, godly woman that she was, that she wasn't out for glory herself. And she was just wanting things to happen the way they were supposed to. I called Abigail a while ago, and I've told y'all that I can't keep my kids' names straight, and some of you laugh at that and you don't believe me, but you've seen evidence of it right here today. So, all right, tomorrow we'll get back to verse 11 and finish chapter 4, and we'll see how the battle goes. So join us again tomorrow, and we won't record that one. Probably we'll just put the text up, but keep studying God's word and keep learning, and keep staying safe.